All right. Well, welcome back to Table Talk, everyone. I'm your host, Yvette Gallinar, and I have a new guest on the program today that I am incredibly excited about. I'll tell you a little tiny bit about him, but he's going to go ahead and share a lot more today. But he is a researcher, he's an explorer and founder of Stargatevoyager, and it's a platform dedicated to reconstructing the prehistoric past, revealing the evidences of lost technology and awakening minds to see our true hidden history. He is none other than Derek Olson. Derek, welcome, welcome, welcome to Table Talk.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor. Really excited about some of these topics we're going to get into. And kind of like you said in the bio, I hope some of this might awaken some minds and get people excited about our history and how it relates to our everyday lives.
Yeah, Derek, I have to say I've never in my past, I should say, was I a history buff. Didn't like it in school, growing up. And the more I began to research the things in the Bible, of course, the Lord called me to pastor together with my husband, the church here in Miami. And the more I grew, if you will, in my relationship with the Lord, I found research, I found history to be so, so cool and so amazing. And a lot of history uh, does confirm the Bible, does confirm the Word of God, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. So much things that are being discovered today is proving, what the ancient scriptures talk about and what they say and there's just so much more to history than we've been told,
Yeah.
even in the church, which is why I'm so passionate about this. Growing up, if you're as old as me, maybe you went to Sunday school as a kid,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
you got the flannel graph version of a lot of things. And bless their hearts, the teachers back in those days were doing the best they could, I'm sure. But yeah, I grew up intrigued as a kid about who were these giants in Genesis 6. Like I was so intrigued by this. And I remember David and Goliath was always my favorite Bible story.
Right.
And I would ask, who were these giants? And it was like my critically thinking self knew there was more than I was being told, that this was just a big, slow guy with a club.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, but those kind of things so intrigued me. And I remember as a kid getting this, I was into dinosaurs, probably like a lot of boys. And I was given a book called The Great Dinosaur Mystery, I think it was. And there was this picture in the back of the book, an actual photograph from the 1980s of a uh, Japanese fishing vessel. Actually, this was 1977 was when the photo was taken.
Okay.
And this photo showed this Japanese fishing vessel pulling up this massive carcass of what looked exactly like a plesiosaur.
Wow.
And so this author was theorizing that uh, maybe there was dinosaurs even living much later than we've been told, because here's a
Mhm.
carcass of what looks exactly like a a plesiosaur, and actually the it was found off the shores of New Zealand. New Zealand even made a stamp
Mm.
because this was such a big discovery in the day. And you can Google that, dinosaur found off New Zealand coast, and probably see pictures of this. But it was stuff like that that just planted little seeds to what's really going on, and is there more than we've being told?
Right.
And so that's kind of how I got into some of this.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to get at in just a minute is, to tell the audience to get to know you a little bit better and how you began researching, for example, megaliths, pyramids, caves, and these, shall I say, bizarre structures that are found all over the world. So, how did you get into the whole megalith type of, research and kind of like put that together
Yeah.
for us a little bit?
Yeah, I was always intrigued by history and ancient structures. And so I was always into history, always had a bent towards it. And I remember, man, way back in like 2008, I was on a trip to Israel
Mm.
and we did a side excursion down to Egypt. This was before I was really down the rabbit hole with a lot of this. But I remember we were at what they call the Wailing Wall in
Yes.
Jerusalem.
Hmm.
Well, you can pay extra to take a tour down underneath that Wailing Wall. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget being down there, again, not knowing anything I'm describing now, but being absolutely blown away.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's called the Kotel tunnels is what the
Yes.
official word is.
The hotel. Yes.
Yeah, seeing these massive blocks, it had to be 100 tons at least minimum
Mm-hmm.
at the very base.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most ancient part of this temple. And I remember thinking then, this is otherworldly. How is this big? How did the ancients before the wheel move this?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a little thing that got planted in my brain. And then I think it really started around 2012. One day I was doing an internet search of ancient Incan structures. And all these images pop up, and one caught my attention, and it was of the megalithic polygonal walls in Peru at a site called Sacsayhuaman.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately I'm thinking, is that real? And I click on it and I'm like, how have I never seen this before?
Wow.
So this is the year 2012. I'm like, I'm in my 20s. How in the world have I never seen a photo of a megalithic wall until this point? It was hidden that whole
Wow.
time.
Wow.
I had never, seen photos or read about polygonal masonry in high school and college.
Yeah. Right.
I had to do a Google image search. So that kind of started me down researching, well, what is this? And of course, the mainstream narrative, well, this is just Inca. And then
Mm-hmm.
I stumbled upon the brilliant research of a researcher named Brian Forster who lives in Peru, who has a YouTube channel that's dedicated to showing that all of this is pre-Inca. This is another age. This is another civilization.
Yeah.
And so he was saying these are megaliths, and these were built with an ancient lost technology.
Mm.
And so while this was just blowing my mind, and so I did more research. A few years later, I ended up going to Peru on one of Brian's tours, seeing these
Wow.
up close for myself, seeing the elongated skulls of Paracas, which we could talk about if you
Wow.
want.
Yeah.
And I was hooked. I knew there was a definitely a cover up of history
Yeah.
that was stating that this incredible ancient engineering that was I 100% believe was created with lost technology. Instead, they were telling us, well, this was just made by, primitive ancients
Yeah.
with their chisels and hammers. But anybody with a critical thinking mind knows that you can't take a soft chisel and hammer made of copper and precision engineer something made out of a harder material like granite,
Yeah.
right? Where you can't put a human hair through the joints.
Yeah.
And so I came home with all of this photographic evidence and videos, and I'm like, man, what do I do with this? And so I just started a blog. Originally, it was called megalithic marvels.com. Now it's stargatevoyager.com.
Hmm.
And I started a blog and some, social media and just started posting videos and photos. And I was blown away by the response of how
Yeah.
hungry people were for this knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my story.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, how I think that's the kind of stuff that God has us do sometimes, right? Is like he places this in front of us, like, hey, take a look at this. What do you think of this? And it gives us that, direction unbeknownst to us, because, when we have that inkling or desire to know more and to like dig out even more. I mean, I always tell the church, our church, that, don't just read the Bible just to read it. I mean, dig out some of these really interesting verses that I was saying even last week, it make you scratch your head and go, well, why is that in there? Why would God say that? Why would God do that? What, you know what I mean? So I think that was your path
Yeah.
all
So
along.
good.
But you mentioned the Paracas skulls. I've had L.A. Marzulli a couple of times on, and he's LA. He's got all his like stuff in the back. He's had got the big skull. He showed it to me and stuff. You wanted to talk a little bit about that. You want to go into that?
Oh yeah, and since you bring up LA, I've got to give him his credit. He was one of the guys that really kind of got me going too. And I can share a funny story. So, in my initial research around 2012, one of the books I stumbled upon was On the Trail of the Nephilim by L.A.
Yeah.
Marzulli.
Oh yeah.
And so this was back then. It was a big old picture book,
Yeah.
and he just laid it out. Like this is, obviously he starts with the Nephilim in Genesis 6, and
Right.
he detailed them all the way down to these Paracas skulls in
Mm-hmm.
Peru. And so I was living in California at the time, and I'm getting deep into my research, and I came across the story of Lovelock Cave in Nevada
Oh,
and the red-haired giants, and I came across some old articles detailing possible hidden skeletons that were hidden in Virginia City, Nevada, underneath this old storefront.
oh my goodness.
And so I had emailed LA, hey, I know you're always on the trail, so here's some information I found. You can do with it what you want. And so he looked into it and found that it was credible enough to
Hmm.
where he wanted to go check this out.
Okay.
And so next thing I know, he's asking if I can pick him up at the airport.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 'cause so he flew into he flew into Sacramento. I'm driving LA Marzulli out to the middle of
Oh my
nowhere
gosh.
in this it's a small town called Virginia City. It's like a total western town that's was lost in time.
Wow.
And LA had somehow paid off or gotten permission from this owner to go into the basement of this old storefront, which was from the 1800s,
Oh my goodness.
downtown Main Street. So this was so thrilling that I am with L.A. Marzulli, and we're gonna go look for a giant skeleton underneath the basement.
That sounds about right.
And just going down under the basement was cool enough
Hmm.
because as you're going, I mean, this is an old, again, old building. We were seeing relics from the 1800s
Oh,
and the
how
cowboy
cool.
days, and we get down there, and suspended from the ceiling is this huge wooden box, and the owner's like, the skeleton's in there. And
No.
so and so LA's like, he's kind of filming himself walking up this ladder, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's he gonna find? Not to totally be a downer, and unfortunately, it wasn't necessarily a giant
Okay.
Nephilim skeleton. He
Okay.
got up there, and the crazy part was it was a skull and all these bones, which is
Yeah.
creepy enough.
Yeah.
But in LA discerned that this was, Native American, and it was probably like just a larger 6'2" skeleton, which is pretty large for
Right.
their time.
Right. Right.
But it was an amazing experience nonetheless. And
That
gave me a taste for just traveling and getting out to explore.
you got
And
hooked.
so, yeah, I did. And so, LA's got a great place in my heart. So yeah, these Paracas skulls in Peru,
Yeah.
in near the coast on the west coast, there's an area called Paracas, Peru. It's probably where the largest elongated skulls are on Earth.
Yeah.
In the 1920s, an archaeologist first started to discover these tombs that were full of these skulls, and they're all dated to be between like 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Now, skeptics immediately will say, well, that's just cradle headboarding. You've probably heard that,
Yeah.
where the ancients would squeeze the heads of the infants
Mm-hmm.
to change the shape.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what's going on is there's two types of elongated skulls in Peru and really around the world. There's the original natural elongated skulls, as we would say,
Yeah.
and that's what L.A. Marzulli and Brian Forster would say. And then there's the cradle headboarded skulls, which are just normal humans trying to look like the natural elongated skulls,
Mm,
right? So that's why people get confused because you do find cradle headboarded skulls there as well.
mhm.
Those skulls are just like ours, same proportions, same eye sockets, but just shaped.
Yeah.
But these naturally elongated skulls, they have so many crazy anatomical genetic differences. There's no way they're just human.
Right.
No way. Because cranial deformation can't add more mass to the skull. And that's the big difference is these skulls on average have 25, 30% more cranial mass and volume. Some of them have up to 50%, like double our cranial mass.
Wow.
And then they have larger eye sockets. And I can send you pictures of these. And they're missing the sagittal suture lines like our skulls have.
Yeah.
Um, Jaw sizes are bigger. And then even the foramen magnum, that's the hole where our neck attaches to the head. On us, it's in the middle center of our
Mm-hmm.
head. On these, it's way in the back.
Mm.
So total genetic. And then what's more is in just the last 5, 10 years, there's been numerous uh, elongated skulls found and even mummies of newborn infants, of children, huge skulls. So proving these were absolutely born this way. This
Yeah.
was a race of humanoids, if you want to call that.
Yeah.
And it's crazy when you really get into the ancient Incan legends. I was just in Peru last October, and it's so
Mhm.
great to learn from our tour guides who descend from the Inca and know the real history of
Right.
the Andes.
Yeah.
They full on will tell you the Paracas, they died out 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Well, they migrated to Cusco and they were the Inca royalty. When we say Inca, it wasn't the whole population, it was just the royalty. And all the Inca royalty had dark red hair
Mm-hmm.
and elongated skulls as well. And
Mm.
so these were considered the ruling class, the priests, the teachers. Um, and so, but during the time of the Inca, in the 1400s, it was just, again, it wasn't the whole population, it was just the few rulers, right? Um, but even the Inca and all of these, and we can talk about some of the portals and stargates, all of their ancient sites that look like portals.
Mm-hmm.
The Inca legends state that during the solstices,
Mm-hmm.
um, they would venerate and worship at these sites. And what they would do is they would pull out the mummies.
Mm-hmm.
These elongated skull mummies were the most prized possession of the Inca. They
Wow.
hid them everywhere. When the Spanish came and conquered, they were burying them all underneath the city to save them. Well, some of them still exist, and I'll send you pictures. Um, this one called Waiki, I mean, it looks basically like you're looking at I'm sorry, an alien mummy. It's so deformed.
Wow.
But according to the Inca's own legends, they would put these elongated skull mummies in the Stargate portal looking megalithic structures. And on the solstice, um, basically, in short, these mummies would become animated and would speak to the Inca and, demand sacrifice and give them orders. So how crazy is that for some history?
Man, that is crazy. That's wild stuff. And I was going to ask you that because, someone will hear all this and they'll go like, wait a minute, like what's all this mean? And for for us who, are Bible believing, Bible teaching type of individuals that we, believe the word of God to be true. Like, what does all that have to
Mhm.
do with anything? I mean, what would you tell the audience? I mean, okay, it's all interesting. All this history is neat. Maybe there was some, ancient civilization that had these
Mhm.
funky skulls and all that. But what do you think it all means? Who were these people? Who were these
Yeah.
entities, if you will?
Great question. And yeah, you've probably got listeners going, Yvette, who'd you bring on your show? Who is this nut?
Hey, I bring some strange individuals too.
Yeah, let me try to connect the dots. So,
Yeah, do that.
and I'll give a little, let me preface this with, again, if you dig into the Bible and ancient manuscripts such as the Book of Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, even historians like Josephus
Mm-hmm.
and Homer, the Greek historians. So we've got historians that are non-biblical, guys, but they're all speaking of this race of ancient giants who once walked the earth.
Right.
Genesis 6:4 is the most famous Bible scripture. I could give you countless others. I think it's Numbers 13, where the children of Israel are spying out the promised land, right? You want to know why they were so freaked out? Because they were literal giants,
Exactly.
but not in a big, dumb, slow way. Think of the Uruk-hai from the Lord of the Rings, if you ever watched those movies.
Mm-hmm.
These were big, fast, super strength uh, entities with super abilities.
Yeah.
And so, again, the Bible's talking about giants all over. If you look into David's mighty men,
Mm-hmm.
the common thread is they're all giant hunters
Mm.
and they're slaying this illegal creation, which I'll get into.
Yeah.
And so again, what the Bible mentions in passing in Genesis 6:4, Moses is writing like people just understand this.
Right.
Sadly, today we don't. The
Right.
book of Enoch is going into great detail to what Genesis 6:4 says in passing.
Yeah.
Now, the book of Enoch obviously is not part of the Bible, it's not part of the canon, yet the book of Jude references the book of Enoch. So it was considered a very historical important book.
Yes.
So again, Dead Sea Scrolls, part of one of the scrolls was called the Book of Giants, and it goes into detail on all this too.
Yeah.
Again, Josephus, Homer. Josephus makes a great quote. He was a first century historian that talked about the Roman and Jewish wars. He talks about giants in so many places in his
Mm-hmm.
accounts and how
Yeah.
that the giants in his day were on display in the
Yeah.
museums of the day, and that he even describes them. They were terrible to your eyes, and they were known as being horrible to your ears, almost hinting that they had um, strange communicative properties or ways.
Mm.
So, what's more, again, back to Peru, you look at the writings of the Spanish chroniclers, they're documenting and they're just talking about conquest of Peru, but they talk about giants discovered all over Peru. And then you've got countless 20th century US newspapers
Mm-hmm.
talking about when the gold rush is happening and people are moving west.
Mm-hmm.
All over, they're finding giant skeletons. I've documented several of these, from the New York Times. It'll say 8-foot giant found in mound,
Mm-hmm.
10-foot giant found in cave, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got all that. We've even got bones and skeletons, large skulls. I mentioned Lovelock Cave. We've
Mm-hmm.
actually got photographs from actual anthropologists that found some of these skulls. So what's the big picture for Christians? There's over 2 billion of us, I think, in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
Yet sadly, the majority of believers, I would say they don't actually have a biblical worldview when it comes to our ancient past in the pre-flood or golden age world. So that creates a lot of problems. There's a massive trickle-down effect, therefore, into how they view God and
Mm-hmm.
how they engage with culture today. That's the big uh, takeaway. And
Yeah.
so I believe that understanding the Genesis 6 narrative, the Nephilim,
Yeah.
the Golden Age, the Atlantean world, it's fundamental to understanding the true
Mm-hmm.
nature of God, who he is, what he wants. And so Genesis, when it talks about there were giants on the earth in those days, that Hebrew word is Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
and it basically is talking about giants. And it says they came into the sons of God. That means angels came into the daughters of men
Mm-hmm.
and bore children to them. It says
Mm.
these were the mighty men who are of old, men of renown.
Right.
And so if a Christian doesn't get that these mighty men of old were a illegal hybrid creation, plotted by Satan ultimately, right?
Yeah,
He doesn't have the strength to full on have a war with God and beat him. He already tried that and was kicked out of heaven, right?
exactly.
So his plan was, Now we know that in the garden, uh, the serpent obviously took on a form,
Mm-hmm.
speaking to Adam and Eve.
Yes.
We know in later in Genesis when God and the angels are going to take out Sodom and Gomorrah,
Mm-hmm.
they show up to Abraham. Abraham feeds them a meal, wants to wash their feet. Clearly, they took on a form as they came into our dimension.
Correct.
When they go to Sodom, what do the perverse people there, men, what do they want to do to these angels?
Mm-hmm.
They want to have sexual relations with
That's
them.
right.
Clearly, they have sexual functionality.
Right.
And my point with all that is somehow when they come into our dimension, to our world, our earth, when they take on form, these angels, these sons of God,
Mm-hmm.
fallen angels, they can procreate, they can breed.
Mm.
And so this was the plan of the dark side to, oh, let's breed with earth women and create this illegal hybrid race,
Mm-hmm.
half human, half hybrid, and we will breed out,
Mm.
as LA would probably say a whole lot more articulately than I'm doing. We'll breed out the purebloods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can all see where that goes.
Yeah.
The Messiah doesn't happen. He doesn't
Right.
come. And it's crazy how that relates to today, and everything is about genetics. Everything is
Yes.
about DNA manipulation. We can see they're trying to do it again. They probably already have done it again, just way more sinister than they were even doing in Genesis 6. So the
Right.
point is, there was these hybrids. It's interesting that right after the Bible introduces the Nephilim giants, this illegal hybrid race, what happens? The flood.
Exactly.
The flood. God is saying checkmate to the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're gonna do this? No, you're not. I'm gonna take the last pure-blooded humans, put them on a boat, wipe all of you out, and we'll start over. So the flood really is this love story. It's a rescue mission.
Yes.
Yet as a kid, I was basically taught, God was angry at human sin. So he's just going to mass murder everybody, except for a few people that sin wasn't as bad as the rest.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I don't think we sin any less than they did
Correct.
thousands of years ago, right?
So good.
Probably
Yes.
invented more crazy ways to sin. So the flood is a rescue mission. It's a love story
Mm.
of God saving imperfect humanity, not because they sinned less, but because they were created in his image.
Mm.
And so that's the takeaway. If you don't get that, you're going to have this unbiblical worldview. Well, that God kind of is just this mad taskmaster. I don't know when he's going to snap. I don't know when he's going to, when you have that theology, how can you truly receive love from God?
Yeah.
Right? Because you're always thinking, man, have I crossed the line? Um, and so that gets into when God is even telling Israel to wipe out the inhabitants of Canaan. Again, is God just going psychotic today and advocating for mass murder of women, children?
Mm.
No, these were illegal hybrids. These were Nephilim tribes. The
Mm.
Bible gives us all kinds of descriptions about their height, supernatural abilities.
Yeah.
And so again, I think that's a long way of answering your question in what's this mean for believers.
You couldn't have said it any better. I mean, it is perfect. And not to mention their dark occult practices. It just so happens that we're in a series at church called The Promised Land. So we're into the book of Joshua. And I spoke just a little tiny bit about that last week about how God isn't this angry God up there in heaven just wanting to strike people dead, and that there was a reason why he would devote to destruction, the harem, for certain peoples and even their animals. And it sounds really horrible, but not unless you understand these things, then you won't understand God. You won't understand the word of God. So well said. Well said.
Oh, and I thank you. I should add to really bring it full circle because you asked about who were the Paracas, these elongated skulled humanoids I
Yeah,
talked about. I fully believe these were uh, descended from the Nephilim. So we had them
right.
living as early as 3,000 years ago,
Wow.
literally right there in Peru. And again, when we say Nephilim, they weren't, it doesn't mean they were just all tall. Originally, they were, known for their giant size.
Right.
But there's all kinds of other ancient texts that describe, the Book of Enoch included, how it's kind of like Narnia. There was all kinds of creatures. There was dwarves. I mean, it's crazy. All over Peru, you see ancient structures for entities this big. I mean, full on little temples and doors.
Wow.
So there was crazy things going on. The Book of Enoch even talks about how they were manipulating the genetics of animals. They were creating
Yes.
monsters.
Hmm.
And so we could even talk about how the dinosaurs played into that on some other future show, but there was crazy stuff happening. And I think that's why it's important for, believers to have a hold on this or at least start investigating it.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. Bottom line. All right. Well, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about something interesting. There really are so many mysteries, right, out there. Not just really in our country because we see them all over the world too. And for me, one of the most interesting monument sculptures, of course, among many, many others, is the Great Sphinx of Giza. And I know that you recently visited Egypt and I was watching your little journey there, and I was going, man, I wish I could have had an opportunity to go to that. So you'll have to tell me when you're going to go again. But um, talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, how many pyramids would you say have been found? I'm sure that there are many others that haven't been found or they're still being found. I heard hopefully we'll get to talk about this a little later, but I understand that they're still finding pyramids. They're still finding some of these things. So how many would you say have been found, and what for you have has been the most interesting one?
Great questions. I think if my memory serves me right, there's been about 5,000 total pyramids found around the planet. I mean, there's so many different categories we could talk about of
Yeah.
pyramids. I think in like South America, there's at least about 20 what you could call, fairly ancient pyramids. Central America, Mexico, there's like I think about over 100. And then in Egypt, I mean, there's pyramids everywhere, but when we're talking about the truly ancient ones,
Right.
I mean, there might be 10.
Wow.
And so, but again, there's so much that is hidden. There's so much
Yeah.
that hasn't been excavated. And I just did interviews with a guy on my podcast, Robert Edward Grant, who just got back from Brazil, and Brazil. He was showing it would seem to be very clear pyramids hidden almost in plain sight in the jungles of Brazil that looked way more believable than anything you might see in Antarctica. And so, but even when you look at like some of these ancient Mexican pyramids, like Teotihuacan,
Mm-hmm.
when you see photos before that's been excavated and restored to what we see
Mm-hmm.
now, it just looked like an old grassy hill. And so, I think there's way more than we even know of.
Oh yeah.
But my favorite's definitely got to be the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's the biggest of the three Great Pyramids we call them.
Yeah.
And I was just literally in Egypt a couple weeks ago. Amazing trip. and our group got to enjoy a private 2 hour visit
Oh, wow.
inside
Man.
the Great Pyramid of Giza all by ourselves. And so that was just the most amazing part of the trip. That's to me the most amazing ancient structure on the planet.
Yeah.
And I can go into why if you want, but
Yeah, definitely.
it's there's so much to share, and we got to talk about the Sphinx too, because I know
Yeah,
you
that's
talked
okay.
about that. But um, mainstream academia tells us that the Great Pyramid, this was basically just a tomb
Mm,
that was built around 2500 BC by the dynastic Egyptians. And that's important for people to know. The dynastic Egyptians, this is like the King Tuts of the world, Khufu, Khephren. These were great. Uh, this was an amazing culture, the dynastic Egyptians.
hmm.
But in no way do I believe that they originally built the Great Pyramids.
Right.
But they get credit for it, and they get credit for building almost everything in Egypt.
Hmm.
But what I believe happened 100% is they just found all this
Hmm.
and they repurposed it.
Mm,
So they might have used it as a tomb 2500 BC. The pharaohs saw these uh, pyramids and they knew that they collected cosmic waves. And so these dynastic pharaohs repurposed the pyramids. They wanted to be buried in them because they knew it was like a generator of energy among many functions. And the pharaoh wanted to be buried inside to basically receive the pyramid energy of the pyramid.
hmm.
And he thought this was his way to cross through portals and traverse the afterlife into other dimensions.
Mm.
But when you go into the Great Pyramid, the first thing you realize is this thing feels like a giant machine.
Wow.
There's three main chambers, the so-called King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber, and the subterranean chamber that's just way underneath the
Right.
bedrock. Well, when you go into the King's Chamber, uh, number one, there's never been any confirmed, mummies found in any of the Great Pyramids. And they want us to believe that these are right next to the Valley of the Kings. You've probably heard
Mm.
of that.
Yes.
Well, the Valley of the Kings is 10 hours away by car,
Hmm.
almost like it's in another country. When you go to the Valley of the Kings, these big tunnels in the ground, you see all this colorful Egyptian artwork and paintings and hieroglyphs and real
Right.
sarcophaguses where they did find mummies. But you find none of that in the Great Pyramids.
Mm.
It's completely different. The Great Pyramid, no color. It's just completely, gray, no hieroglyphs, no artwork depictions, no sarcophaguses. The thing you see in the King's Chamber is actually a box
Mm.
that I believe housed some kind of device.
Mm.
So again, when you're going down the 300-foot passageway, you're bent over because you can't stand upright. So it's very hard, and you're holding on to these wooden railings and little steps they've put in. So you got to ask yourself, how would the dynastic Egyptians of 3000 BC have had this massive funeral procession with giant statues and sarcophaguses
Mm.
without steps, without railings, when you can't even stand up? So
Mm.
you can see the functionality. It's not even made really for humans as we know them to be going through. It's like this was a maintenance shaft.
Right.
And so, yeah, the Great Pyramid is just this incredible structure. It's and one thing I like to tell people is look at the massive effort by mainstream media, the political powers that be to feed us a daily diet of what we would call fake news, right? So
Exactly.
if they'll work that hard to hide today's news from us, what lengths would they take to hide our real history from us?
Wow.
And I believe that's exactly what they've done because those who control the past control the future. So
Right.
they strategically disinform us regarding the prehistoric past. They say, well, this is just all 2500 BC. It was
Hmm.
just made as a tomb. It's just a triangle of blocks. And so they distract us with that
Right.
when it's so much older and it was for such a different purpose, right? And
Yeah.
so repurposed is the key word there. But the Great Pyramid's almost 500 feet tall. It's composed of 2.5 million blocks. And again, mainstream tells us this was made by a huge workforce of people cutting, shaping, and moving,
Wow.
setting into place limestone blocks using sleds and ramps. But if you do the math on that, like some have done, this would mean that, oh, and they tell us this was done over a 10 to 20 year period,
Yeah.
concluding around
Right.
2500 BC. But again, if you do the math, that means that each stone would have to be quarried, shaped, moved, set into place every 2 minutes,
Incredible.
just for it to be done in a 15 to 20 year period.
Yeah.
No way that's possible.
No.
And so it's a stunning work of artistic achievement, the
Hmm.
work of masters of architecture. For example, some of the blocks in the Great Pyramid, they weigh 70 tons and they were raised more than 300 feet above the ground. And so just the achievement of making it into a high precision structure is unfathomable. If you make any tiny mistake at the base, by the time you get to the top, it's a mess,
Yeah.
right? And if they were really using sleds, ramps, and pulleys on ramps, just the scale of the ramp at 10 degrees would be the massive one of the most massive structures ever built in the ancient world, just so that they could get the blocks up, right, into the king's chamber that are 300 feet above ground level. So there's no way I'm convinced they built it like that.
No.
The ancients had a lost technology. When you're walking around the Great Pyramid, you see saw-like and laser-like ancient cuts everywhere.
Oh, it's
You
crazy.
find core drill holes in stones all over. They had tools, and we can see the evidence of it. When
Yeah.
you go inside the so-called king's chamber, even on the walls in the box, you see microscopic um, cuts, vertical cuts
Right.
from tools.
Right.
There's no way a chisel could precision shape stuff this way.
Right.
So the Great Pyramid is my favorite, and so much I could say, but I want to talk about the Sphinx too.
Well, I was thinking too that those tools or machinery or whatever it was that they used have really never been found. So that's pretty amazing in and of itself as well. Because I mean, you have found, you know, chisels or whatever, whatnot. Oh, this is what they
Mhm.
used. You'll see those programs. This is what they had to have used, and you're kind of like that's kind of a little bit of an incredible, storyline to try to
Uh-huh.
believe. But like you were saying, so imagine. I mean, what in the world could they have been using, and where is that technology now? Right?
Yeah, and I'll send you some pictures to really blow people's minds that you can use. The smoking gun of all of this is at I mean, there's several. There's a box at the Egyptian Museum that basically shows what looks like a laser cut slicing this granite box like Swiss cheese.
Incredible.
I'll send you that photo. But then at the Aswan Quarry, where the world's biggest obelisk is, it's called the Unfinished Obelisk. It's 1,200 tons.
Yeah.
It's massive. Standing on it, I would look like an ant. When you get around the obelisk, you can walk down. Guess what you see? You see 1 meter wide um, scoop marks that go from the top of where the obelisk starts. And again, this is 1,200, pounds. So this is massive.
Right.
You see a scoop mark that goes down. I'll move my hand so people can see. It goes down, it scoops under the obelisk, and it pulls out. And you see this the whole length around the obelisk, right? You literally see the evidence of this machine that was penetrating into extremely hard rose granite, which is an 8 on the Mohs scale,
Wow.
like it was butter. So somehow they were softening the stone, and that's why it was easy for them.
Incredible.
Yeah. So it's an incredible place. Again, ancient technology. The point is, I don't believe this was the dynastic Egyptians. This was somebody else. So
Yeah.
the most mind-blowing thing to me is when you go to Egypt, you've got these pyramids, which were, if you read Chris Dunn's books, he wrote the book Giza Power Plant.
Hmm.
He's an engineer with a brilliant mind. I would say that's a must read for people that are interested in this stuff. He proposes that the Great Pyramids were basically um, highly technical, holistic energy devices that were powering the civilization with energy.
Wow.
So you've got the pyramids that were like power plants. You've got massive temples. People can Google the Valley Temple. It's right next to the Sphinx. It's got totally different functionality. All these temples were known as healing or fertility centers.
Hmm.
They were regenerating their bodies. They
Hmm.
didn't need, vaccines. They didn't need to pop pills. They just knew the magnetism of the earth mixed with the geology of the stone. And I'm not a geologist, but the more I'm getting into it, it's crazy the energy you do feel at some of these sites. Even though they're basically shut off, you can still feel some of the energy at times
Wow.
just because of the magnetism of the earth with the granite encapsulated by limestone. It releases energy.
Yeah.
And so this is what the ancients were doing. So they had these healing centers, fertility centers, and then there's the statues. And I'll send you a picture of this. All over Egypt are colossal statues,
Yeah.
precision cut from single pieces of extremely hard stone like granite. They're super ancient and very weathered, but you can still see the crazy precision on them. Like they were, again, laser cut. I hate saying that, but that's the best English word to describe what
Yeah.
you see. But these statues depict who these ancients were. This ancient ruling class that I believe existed at least minimum 10,000 BC, before some massive worldwide flood or cataclysm. And
Mm.
so these ancients, um, the dynastic Egyptians were emulating what they looked like, if that makes sense.
Yes, I was going to ask that. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to verbalize is the dynastic Egyptians again came across this, saw these statues, saw their ancient symbols, adopted those
Mm.
symbols into their hieroglyphics,
Yeah.
and took on their names. So Ramses II, who's a dynastic Egyptian king, he tagged all these sites as his. It's
Hmm.
like graffiti.
Right.
He took on the name of the original, him and his father took on the name of the original Ramses Titan that is mentioned on the base of some of these statues. And then
Wow.
he took on the appearance of him because he wants to be Ramses reincarnate, basically.
Hmm.
And so, again, that's some deep side notes, but that's
Yeah.
what's going on in Egypt.
Yeah. And they were most definitely believed to be gods.
Absolutely.
Humans believed to be gods.
So I
So,
was theorizing with someone on our tour who was a believer, and she had some great points. She's going, Derek, so from a biblical worldview, if these statues depict this pre-flood ruling class, the golden age rulers, the gods, who are they? Are these the Nephilim? Or are these the watchers? That was a great question I thought she had. Could these depict the original watchers who came down, took
right.
on form, and set up camp?
Right.
Because they have such a unique appearance
Right.
and so flawless. It's like they're Greek gods, but this is way before Greek. The Greeks really basically stole everything from Egypt. Egypt just doesn't get the credit for it. So all
Yeah.
the knowledge the Greeks had, they came to Egypt and took.
Yeah.
So isn't that an interesting thought about the Watchers?
It is. It is. And if you think about it, I mean, it sounds about right because I mean, I've thought about that many a times. I mean, was it were they the giants? Were they the giants building these things in worship and homage to these entities that were their parents? They were the watchers. So, I mean, there's a lot of speculation that we can make, but it's one of those situations where you think to yourself, man, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's real. It's real. It's out there. It's been discovered. But don't believe the narrative you're hearing. Don't believe the documentaries that you watch because there's much, much, much more involved in all of that. So I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. What a tour.
Yeah.
What a tour. So you were going to talk real briefly about the Sphinx, though.
Oh
I know
yeah.
we probably won't have time to get through everything that we had in mind today, but that's okay. We'll get together again, I'm sure. So,
Yeah, the Sphinx, this is again, according to standard Egyptological thinking, and again, the Egyptologists, those are basically an Egyptologist is an archaeologist who's basically majoring just in Egypt
right,
history, right? And I don't want to throw all Egyptologists under the bus because, like our tour guide, Muhammad Ibrahim, he's one of the few Egyptologists, and you have to go through crazy years of study to be, licensed as an Egyptologist.
sure.
But he's one of the few that's broken with the mainstream and is saying, no, somebody else built this. This was not the dynastic
Oh,
Egyptians.
wow.
And there's more now that are seeing enough evidence and where enough time is passing where some of the old guards dying off and this new generation, that is
Yeah,
one of the exciting things. The new generation of Egyptologists emerging are open to some of these concepts and ideas. And so we're
right.
seeing more saying, hey, there's something else going on here. Oh, and you might have heard about this, the Grand Egyptian Museum it's supposed to have been open for like the last 10 years.
Okay.
And we were really hoping that on this last tour we just had that it would be open so we could go there. Unfortunately, it's still not open. There's been over, I think, $1 billion has gone into opening this new museum. It's going to be the greatest museum on earth. It's going to house all the most amazing artifacts, supposedly. But the inside baseball on why it's been delayed is that because they are finding so many new artifacts that actually show technology or statues holding technology that it's they just know it's going to create a problem, so they're trying to figure out how do we deal with this,
Oh,
what do we hide, what do we change. And so this is the inside baseball talk from the Egyptologists like that I've
wow.
talked with of why it's possibly being so delayed, the opening of this museum, is they've got so many incredible artifacts, but the problem is they're going to blow the doors off the mainstream narrative,
Wow.
So the Sphinx, again, according to mainstream, this was just carved from the limestone bedrock on the orders of Old Kingdom Pharaoh Khafre, again around 2500 BC. But again, the Sphinx, like these giant statues I'm talking about, I 100% believe this was an animal that was carved by this earlier ruling class, the original ancient Egyptians, the prediluvians, as you might call them.
Right.
And so when you look at a picture of the Sphinx from like a drone's eye view or helicopter, you'll see its head's way smaller than the body. And that's because the dynastic Egyptians repurposed it. They recarved the head into a head of, more of a modern day looking pharaoh. It was originally likely a lion or lioness head.
Hmm.
And we've got all kinds of clues that talk about that.
Hmm.
Um, and it's probably way older than 2500 BC because according to geologist Robert Schoch, who's, man, a great critical thinker when it comes to the Sphinx in ancient Egypt, he found heavy erosional features on the Sphinx and in the Sphinx enclosure that it sits off that he concluded could only have been caused by rainfall and massive water runoff. And the Sphinx sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert, obviously, a region that's been arid for like 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So, again, there hasn't been massive water erosion going back to the dynastics, but it probably happened way before. And so he believes that the Great Sphinx, the core body of it, dates back much earlier period. He says circa 10,000 BC or earlier, a time when the climate was very different and included more rain. And archaeologists used to argue that it's impossible for the Sphinx to be 12,000 years. Like literally 5 years ago, they would laugh at that and say, you are such an idiot if you believe that. It's funny, though, how they've been forced to start changing their timelines because you've
Hmm.
probably heard of Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, yes.
Now, with the discoveries being unearthed there, archaeologists, mainstream, are now literally basically being forced to admit, okay, yeah, Göbekli Tepe is way older than we've said. It's probably 12,000 years old. Okay.
Wow.
Well, if you've seen pictures of Göbekli Tepe, you see they've got these massive T pillars with animals on them.
Right?
The point is, if they can admit that Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years ago, they can now admit, okay, yeah, the Sphinx is way older than we've been believing or we've told you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great point. Göbekli Tepe is really changing history as we know it.
Wow.
Um, and it's pretty exciting when the mainstream's saying, yeah, this is older. There's no way we can say any otherwise.
Right.
But the Sphinx, so many mysteries related to it. The dynastic Egyptians, they even talk about it in a couple hieroglyphs. Um, they allude to it being ancient in their time.
Hmm.
And there is secret doors and entrances into the Sphinx.
Hmm.
Again, we can never really see photos of that or get access to it. Only like Zawi Hawass and the Egyptologists. Sometimes they'll leak out a picture of them going into one of these doors or entrances.
Hmm.
But history tells us that there was even a library, or I should say, oral traditions say there was a library possibly hidden
Oh,
underneath the
interesting.
Sphinx. And so there's all kinds of theories of this ancient library and all kinds of tunnels that connect it to the pyramids and other temples. So it's
Yeah.
an amazing thing to see. And it's crazy. If you look up close at the Sphinx, you can see the massive erosion behind it in the enclosure, almost like a flood literally went through there.
Wow.
And then, but they're slowly covering it up. They're restoring it. They're putting, modern blocks around it. So sadly,
Hmm.
if they, we won't someday probably be able to see what it kind of looked like with its ancient limestone.
Yeah.
But
So it sounds to me as though it's something much more than just this monument, that was found. It's maybe another one of those where they were worshiping this image, and they
possibly,
made it into this ginormous size. And then if in fact there's all these secret things in it and under it, it could have been used for a lot of nefarious works and worship and sacrifices, or trying to connect to, the fallen again, or the watchers. Who knows? Who knows? It's got to be fascinating to stand right next to that thing, though.
yeah. No, it's fascinating for sure. Yeah, it is an amazing thing to see. And if people are interested in going to Egypt, I can plug a future tour if you want at the end too.
Would love that. As a matter of fact, I know we could talk for hours
I
about
got
this.
about I got about 10 more minutes or so if that's
Okay.
cool. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah, all right. So let's fast forward a little bit, because I know that I want to be respectful of your time. Um, but talk to me a little bit about Stargates. Let's fast forward to that. You had an interview recently, or you had an interview, I know, with Tony Merkel from the Confessionals podcast
Yeah.
a few months ago, and you both talk about the strange phenomena, for example, of Skinwalker Ranch. I'll be honest, I'm a fan of watching the show. So call me weird, whatever. But I do watch it. I've watched all the seasons, but you talk a little bit about that. Uh, Also, the mystery with CERN, that's been a topic of conversation here on Table Talk before as well. And you mentioned Jacob's ladder found in the Old Testament. So talk us through Stargates for the next few moments, and then we'll close out of that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, originally my platform name was Megalithic Marvels,
Yeah.
which, was, I thought, a great name. I eventually changed it to Stargate Voyager last year. And there was a couple different reasons for that. I was facing some major censorship,
I
and
remember.
for some reason, like on Instagram, the word megalithic was basically flagged and banned. And so therefore they were flagging my account.
Wow.
Um, It's almost like the hashtag megalith was pointing people to too much.
Hmm.
And so that and some other things just got me thinking, man, Stargate, in Egypt, the word Stargate is everywhere. The
Hmm.
Egyptian word for Stargate is Saba,
Hmm.
and you find it embedded at almost every site. Saba,
Wow.
Stargate, and you see the star and the temple gate, Stargate. The ancients were infatuated with stargates. In Peru, again, we talked about. You get into the ancient Incan legends, and everything they're talking about is the portal, the Chicana. It's traversing into other realms.
Wow.
And I can tell you some crazy stories of one super quick in 30 seconds, one of the most fascinating ancient sites in Peru. It's it's way off the beaten path. In this ravine, halfway up a mountainside in the Andes is a cave.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the cave is the most mind-bending trapezoidal portal-looking stargate in the side of a mountain you've ever seen.
Hmm.
So high up, nobody brought power tools up to try to create this. This is very ancient and it was a holy place to the Inca because they found it.
Hmm.
And it's known as a stargate, a portal. And, you know, the Inca legends basically state that on the solstice, the light hits. There's like a console altar looking piece on this side with a hole. The light shines through. And in short, the ancients would kneel into this console and they would press their third eye into this hole and they would get the key that would allow them to go to the portal, which it's a faux door, but it's like seven layered precision into this mountain. Again, that's very occultic what the Inca were
Oh
doing.
yeah, for sure.
But the crazy part is on a tour there years ago, that first tour I went on, we go up in there and the guide had an Incan shaman who was telling us how sacred this place was and how we couldn't do anything to basically disrupt the gods and or the spirits. And he was beating a drum and worshiping, and he was inviting everyone to meditate.
Okay, wait, I gotta ask you, what were you doing at the time?
Oh, I was like praying, right?
I'm gonna say
And pleading the blood. And
exactly.
so I'm sitting there while these people are meditating. And
Mm.
again, it was peaceful for the first few minutes. But then all of a sudden we heard a blood-curdling scream. And one guy in the group is literally like it's like he's being attacked.
Right.
You know where this is going.
Yeah.
And he is screaming and flailing his arms around. And when he settled down, he basically said that a puma came through that portal. And I don't know if he said either entered him or just came at him and basically scared him to death. And so that was such a crazy revelation to me of
Wow.
the connection to these ancient sites
Yeah.
and in the spiritual realm
Right.
and how they're still active. We're talking stargates here,
Yeah.
and not just where you can go, but what can come through.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're doing, and if you're playing with fire, basically.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's a kind of a crazy story to set up what I think stargates are. Stargate in a traditional sense is basically a portal or even a device that allows rapid travel between two distant locations, right?
Hmm.
Some would say it's an advanced piece of technology capable of sending people or objects, like millions of light years ahead in an instant by means of like an interstellar conduit. Some people call it a wormhole.
Hmm.
It's crazy. In 2015, there's studies you can Google. NASA basically admitted to the idea of portals or wormholes, and they were even doing this massive project in 2015 about this, sending probes into space, trying to observe uh, the magnetism in space.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that NASA was looking into this.
Yeah.
Um, and there's so much more I could say. I think that was called the MMS or multi-scale mission, if people want to Google that in
Mhm.
2015. It was called a magnospheric multi-scale mission. Tasked with studying portals to gain a deeper understanding. And again, people might have heard of strange anomalies on Earth, like the Bermuda Triangle. I'm
Right.
talking about crazy ancient Peruvian caves here.
Yeah.
Again, Egypt, everything is stargates, portals. In the Bible, we've got some very interesting accounts. You know, you mentioned Jacob's ladder,
Hmm.
where he literally called it the
Right.
gate of God, where there was this opening and he saw angels ascending and descending, coming in, going out,
Hmm.
and going up and down, right? From one realm to another.
Right.
And I think my favorite account in the Bible would be the Mount of Transfiguration.
Mm.
You know, I think it's Luke 9:30, and there's another account of it, maybe in Matthew. And people who have a decent grasp on the Bible, they've probably heard the story. Jesus is hanging out with the disciples on a high place, a high mountain. It's really debated where this was.
Mhm.
I lean towards this was probably on Mount
Mm.
Hermon, where the Watchers coincidentally descended, right?
Mhm.
According to the Book of Enoch.
Mhm.
Mount Hermon's the highest mountain in Israel. Well, so you've got the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus, fully God, fully man. He's just hanging out with the disciples, and suddenly he's being transfigured.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my word, they see Elijah and Moses. They're talking with Jesus, right? Clearly, Elijah and Moses in their time are dead, thousands of years dead. So what's going on? Is Mount Hermon, was this area some kind of Stargate portal,
Mm.
like Jacob's ladder? So if you look into this, there's a lot of Bible scholars now kind of theorizing that this probably took place on Mount Hermon. And so on this mountain, God's appearance is changing and he's communicating with Moses and Elijah.
Mhm.
In this moment, they're outside of time, right? They're outside the realm of time. So when Moses was up on top of Mount Sinai and Elijah was up on top of Mount Carmel, God is speaking to them in the present. But
Yeah.
in Moses' time, it would be that present, as well as in Elijah's time, it would be that present as well. And that's why they might have had full confidence in the coming of the Messiah, because they were directly speaking with Jesus at the same time. And the disciples saw this and they're just having their minds blown, right? As
Right.
they're getting a glimpse of, basically, if you want to call it a Stargate or a portal, where they're outside of time.
Right.
They're in their present looking into the past, right? While Jesus is basically in the present at all of these timelines, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense.
So again, I think the Bible, it's crazy because most believers believe crazy things, right? Like Jesus was born of a virgin,
Yes.
that God raised the dead, that God spoke through the mouth of a donkey.
Hmm.
We believe some pretty crazy stuff if you want to make a list, right?
Yeah.
So I ask, why is it hard for you to believe that there were giants in the Bible if you believe that donkeys talk?
That's so true.
Why is it hard for you to believe in something like a portal and
Hmm.
what I just described, Jesus standing outside of time,
Yeah.
when you believe that Philip in Acts teleported from one city to the next? That's another
That's
kind of
right.
example, right?
That's right.
So the Bible itself gives us all of these amazing accounts, and it's mind blowing to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that I like to always say what LA always says, that the church has a truncated view of the supernatural worldview of the Bible. And that's nothing but the truth. You're absolutely right. We believe some things, but then there are other things where we don't want to, well, that's too new agey or whatever. And yeah, new agers can use that for, ungodly
Mhm.
purposes, obviously. But the fact of the matter is that these things exist, and it just confirms the word of
Mhm.
God. So,
That's such a great word. And yeah, because like on my tours, I'll have a handful of believers that come, which is awesome. Then we've got New Agers from all over the world, right?
Yeah.
Who they have a different biblical worldview. And that's cool because by the end of a tour, you are like family with these people. And
Yeah.
that's when they want to know what you really believe and you can
I
share
love that.
anything because then they trust you.
I love that.
And, but what I have to tell the believers a lot of the times is we can just chalk everything up to New Age that we don't understand.
True.
Sadly, a lot of New Agers or people that don't know Christ but are critically thinking, they understand the way God created the earth far better than we do.
Wow.
They understand that this, even though they wouldn't say God created the earth, right? They get that the earth is, their magnetism is a real thing and
Yeah.
geology is a real thing. And when you combine this stuff, energy happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean it's New Age. Um, Again, I'm a believer, but at these Egyptian sites, and again, I'm not meditating and worshiping these things, but
Of
I will
course.
feel energy at times,
Yeah.
impacting my body
Mm-hmm.
because I'm on a magnetic ley line and I'm surrounded by these different stones.
Mm.
And that's like, wow, there is so much more to this. The earth was created so more magnificently than I even realized. The
Yeah.
point is the ancients knew this and were building in a way to harness that.
Right. Right.
So,
Which I believe is still happening today. So, but that's
yeah.
another topic for another day, right?
Uh,
Well, Derek, thanks so much. I wanted you to just share where people can find your work or support your work. Also, your upcoming tours. You said you'd send me something about your upcoming, is it the England tour you're taking? I know you're going to be going to Peru and England as well, right?
yeah, I got our England tour coming up end of this month. So I don't know if we even have spots left for that. And then we've got our Peru tour, which is August 1st to the 12th. We've got a handful of spots left for that.
Wow.
It's going to be the most amazing South American adventure. If anyone's interested, for your listeners, I'll give a 500 discount code out if people are interested. And
Thank
that's
you.
just Peru 2024, all caps.
Okay.
If you enter that upon register, it'll knock off 500. And this is the Peru tour is a 12-day tour. We're going to two countries, Peru and Bolivia. We're going to go like to 15 plus sites. So the price with the discount, I think is 3,900, includes everything except the international flight to Lima. And so we're going to have an amazing time. We're going to have the best guides, English speaking, airport pickup, drop off. So it's really a worry-free tour. All you have
That's
to do is
good.
show up. Everything is handled. Four-star hotels, and people will get a master's level class in the real ancient history of Peru. We're going to see some of the craziest elongated skulls that exist. We're going to go to the major sites like Machu Picchu,
Hmm.
but we're also going to go off the beaten path to see some crazy stuff normal tourists wouldn't. Like I found this little known museum in Bolivia by Lake Titicaca, and it houses some of the strangest elongated skulls I've ever seen. So we're going to get to go into this museum,
Wow.
photograph these things, maybe even touch them with gloves. We'll see.
Wow.
But this is the kind of stuff we're going to get to do. So you can go to stargatevoyager.com/tours to kind of see the lineup. Next year, our Egypt tour will probably be in early December. So if you want to bookmark that page, that's just kind of where you'll see the tours pop up.
Okay.
But other than that, people can go look for Stargate Voyager on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Facebook, all the places. That's kind of where I'm hanging out.
That's awesome. Are you going to go to the Nazca lines, by the way? Are you going to see that?
We're doing the Nazca Lines. That's kind
Okay.
of an actual that's an additional little pre-tour that's like 3 or 4 days before the main one starts.
Oh, cool.
People can click on that and go to the Nazca Lines and see even more. They can go to Paracas and see all the skulls up close.
Nice.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, thank you so much, Derek. I do appreciate your time with me. I'm going to have to get you back when you get back from Peru, so we can touch a little bit on some of the things you saw and what you experienced. So,
Well, that would be great.
Very
Thank you
cool.
so much again for having me on. This was a great conversation. I hope people
Yeah.
find it fascinating, and we'll do this again in the future.
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks again. All right. And thanks for our audience to listen. And be sure to share this with all your friends and your families and tune in to Stargate Voyager. Amen to that, right?
Thanks.
We'll see you next time. Bye.